Bam. Can I get you in here? Let me see. Hold on, back it up. So we're new here. We're new guys.
We're still figuring out all this stuff.
Bam. Oh, damn. All right, this is our first YouTube live, and I see there's nobody tuned in, so we're just talking to ourselves, but we'll do a podcast live. All right. I'm gonna get your levels.
I'm not sure you're tracking one of them.
Yeah.
Keep putting out here.
Just say your name and bio. Or your bio.
Cool. My name is Raul Martinez. Originally from Chicago, here in Prescott now, doing random stuff.
Okay. Cool. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Phil Craft Survival Podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and today on the podcast we got Raul Martinez. What's up, Raul?
Hey, what's going on, Mike? I like the way you said my name.
No, I'm feeling a lot better than yesterday. I was exhausted yesterday, but today we're doing a podcast with Raul, and Raul is a combatives guru, former undercover, former patrol officer, former military guy, former contractor, and yeah, you've done a lot of stuff, man. Give us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, for sure, man. It's flattering to hear you say those things, actually. It always sounds better when somebody else reads your bio. Growing up in the city, it was interesting because, and this is kind of where it all picks up the combative stuff. Growing up in a really urban environment in Chicago, like we fought and nobody was mad at each other. We would just fight, and it would be no winning or losing. It was just like, all right, let's test each other's mettle, and then we'd shake hands and we'd be all good after that, you know? It's a lot different than now where dudes like want to destroy each other for no reason.
They want to kill each other. They want to escalate.
Yeah, it's like, why go there? Let's learn from each other. I grew up in a cool environment as far as that. A lot of old buddies are either in jail or dead, and it was cool that my mom was able to kind of get us out of that area. From there, high school was fun, joined the Army, did 8 years there, closing on 10, I think 8 or 10, I don't even remember anymore, but my last few were, so I did one combat deployment to, we were in Iraq from 7 to 9, missed the 2 buddies we lost, but we always think of them, and that's how they live on, right? And then after that, I came back home. I always laugh because I'm like, there are no parades when I came home, because I stayed after, did a couple extra months, and I came back, joined the reserves as a drill sergeant. Did that for a while. That was awesome. That's kind of where I learned and grew the affinity for teaching, which then translated to what came later. From there, did some contracting stuff. Was in Australia, Jamaica, Barbados, just random places where high-end dudes wanted to go do things and kind of cultivate in that area. That was a lot of fun. Ended up on the Chicago Police Department after that. I didn't know I was going to be a cop, honestly. I really didn't. But cool, it was a good thing that happened. I was on patrol there, quickly moved into attack role and then undercover. Within 3 years, I was undercover, which is kind of unheard of for the department. It's a lot based on resumes and who you know and how well you can articulate your experience and use that to the benefit. I remember my first day in undercover, man. They're like, here's a car. I want you to make sure our guys don't get screwed up. You're doing surveillance. That kind of confidence that they have in you, dude, that's so cool. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, and he was a supervisor willing to put me out there and just like, here, go do this, make sure that our guys are good. Let's see if you're what you're saying. And I was like, just done. So it was good. Everything turned out well. We ended up picking up a couple guys that day, and I was on the team from there. That's where I kind of started to see that there was a lack of training for really close proximity stuff in cars and alleys and gangways and laundry rooms, anywhere where you can think of somebody buying some dope. There was that level of training that was missing. I remember chasing dudes down alleyways. They turned into a hall where it's a gangway, and then there's a fence, and now you're in a 3x3 hallway with a giant fence, and then you're the next wall. So the dude wants to get through you. So you got to do something, right? So that was cool that I was starting to see these things and pick these things up, and so I wanted to fill in the blank, and that's kind of where a lot of the training comes from. After Chicago Police, or after the undercover stuff, I jump over to the academy, start teaching dudes how to shoot, run the ranges, learning a lot from the older crew. Did that. That was a lot of fun. Learned a lot of what to do, what not to do, what regulations are and why there's a deficiency in training, and a lot of it has to do with the legal department. Not that the dudes can't get the training, so you're kind of stuck in an area where the training is potentially there, but there's nobody to teach it, and then the legal side of the department, is it authorizing it? So there's a lot of like little hiccups that are going to hold programs back, which is cool. Why we have the option now to offer this training, because they can come to us and get it. They don't have to worry about their department, right? So spent a lot of time, I spent 2 years training at the academy. That was awesome being an instructor there. Got fully certified through Illinois to be a law dog instructor. And then I kind of resigned from there, moved over to Arizona. I was on the sheriff's office here in town, did that for a little bit, and just kind of wasn't my thing. So pulled away, started to really hone in on the program, put the program together, found what applied as far as, you know, patrol guys and dudes in the middle of the woods and dudes in small confined spaces, and was like, wow, cool, I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna make this program, I'm gonna find dudes that wanna bring it forward, and that's kind of how I ended up here doing the podcast with you, man.
Yeah, I know if you guys follow all the stuff that we do on Fieldcraft Survival, you know we talk about Chicago inner city statistics, because I mean literally the most dangerous places in the United States are in neighborhoods like Austin, for example, and the inner city.
That was one of my first neighborhoods.
That Raul worked, and it's like, I mean, you can go in some rural parts of the country, even towns and cities in America, and be in law enforcement and never see a murder, never see a homicide, never be in a gunfight, never discharge a weapon. And you know, that's what we all hope for. But when you're looking at like the scale of law enforcement experience, especially when it comes to the inner city and what they see, anybody out of Chicago, and everybody knows this, anybody out of Chicago is getting that steep learning curve. It reminds me of like Iraq from 07, 09. I mean, 07 was a bad year. And then, so, you know, coming with that experience and then being able to articulate the training methodologies that we're going to get into a little bit today is one of the, you know, biggest reasons that Raul's teaching Combatives for us. We got a couple other guys, Glenn and Darren, both in California, that will be doing stuff with us in the near future. But for the close proximity course that we actually just put up on the website on fieldcraftsurvival.com, March 9th, from 9 to 1500 to 3 p.m. It's a 6-hour course. We have our first close proximity / level 1 combatives course for Fieldcraft Survival. And that's gonna be awesome. It's gonna be here at our new dojo set up with Fuji mats, and it's gonna be awesome. And I'm looking forward to getting you in, getting the mats in and get everything set up. Now, when you know, I call dudes who grew up banging, like grew up throwing hands and fighting from a young age. Like, you know, you're a good banger. Like I see you throw hands. I see you, even when we did the combative stuff with our special operations prep course, and I could tell immediately if somebody's experiencing combatives by their eyes, by their posture, by the way they breathe. How did you first get started in kind of mixed martial arts, or like where did it start, and kind of what was that progression for you in your experience?
Yeah, so it's funny because we don't really think of how it's going to develop, right? Growing up, you're either getting beat up, you're beating some dudes up, everybody shakes hands after the fact, and it's just fun. Looking back now, I'm like, man, I could have really developed better if I paid attention to what was really happening, but all we were really doing was having fun initially, you know, so everybody knew how to take a punch and get hit. And what was cool is working Austin specifically, I got to see little kids that were out there punching each other with gloves,
slap boxing,
already doing things,
yeah.
And those guys are going to be really well prepared for violent contact later, whether it's good or bad. But man, it was exciting to see that, because that's kind of how I grew up, and I missed seeing it in more affluent neighborhoods. You know, it wasn't there anymore, it wasn't present. It was more like your kid falls and you pick them up instead of letting them deal with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I got into a little bit of wrestling. Wrestling was fun. BJJ was a big one for me when I found out that it was available in the town. I did a lot of that. I think I got up to a blue belt. I got my blue belt through Pete the Great Letzo's in Chicago. Cool dude. I trained with a bunch of guys there. Krav Maga. While I was traveling, ran into IDF guys. Even in Australia, I was training with like legit IDF dudes that wanted to teach some good Krav Maga, and we would do a lot of fighting. Then I linked up with Ryan Hoover, where I got my Fit to Fight black belt, which is a Krav Maga hybrid black belt. That was really cool because that's where he introduced more of like the stand-up stuff with ground stuff to the get-ups, short range stuff, weapon defense, weapon offense, things that were applicable to law enforcement but just needed a little refining, more scenario refining more than anything.
That was his own program out of Krav Maga?
He kind of made a hybrid with his guys.
Some Jeet Kune Do. His own
There you
hybrid,
go. Yeah, he just blended stuff, and that's what I like about our program is we brought in what we needed and we took out what we didn't need anymore. There's no need for like long kicks, or there's no need for Superman punches. Though it's all available, it's great. Let's get to what we really can afford the individual with the time that they have for us, right? So train with those guys. I train here in town. I'm at a small catch wrestling gym and just getting beat up by young guys and beating up the dudes that I can. And there's no ego, there's no nothing. All I want is to be able to keep my body functioning so that when I come into the gym here, we can teach guys, you know? So I need to be on the mats. I need to be seeing what's coming out, what's going where. I had great conversations with Darren. We talked to Kane Flooring, which is crazy. He peeked over our program and he dug it. And it's nice to be able to cross-reference with guys that are teaching straight cage fighting dudes, which is the super MMA stuff, which helps me put this one into perspective, and maybe you want to touch on it right after, but we're offering a course, right? And it's maybe 6 to 12 hours if we're doing 1 day or 2 days, right? These dudes that are training to fight, pro dudes are training 30 hours a week. You know what I mean? And they're training for 10 to 12 weeks for one fight.
Yep.
So expectations need to be realistic when you guys come to train with us, all right? We're gonna give you everything we have so that you can walk away with something. Just don't expect miracles, because you're gonna be the miracle for yourself. You're gonna go out and you're gonna put in the work after the fact, and that's where the results are gonna come. Like, you know, you go to any training course, you go there to receive the information, and then on your own time you reinforce it and make it your own. And that's kind of what we want. But we want to help people understand you're not going to come here and walk out an MMA fighter. You're going to come in here, you're going to learn some great stuff, and then it's going to be applicable to you when you need it, because now you have that file.
Yeah, it's going to be an eye-opening experience, right? I mean, when these people come, I mean, the whole entire point of doing the close proximity course is, and I keep using the term close proximity, I just like it, it flows well, but it's literally a Combatives level 1 course. And, you know, no matter what your background or experience in Combatives, if you don't train and identify what's working versus what's not working for you as an individual based on your physical outline, right? Your weight, your height, your reach, your capabilities are going to be determined in this kind of course where you kind of assess yourself and then your ultimate capabilities, and even taking a skill set and just applying it, right? Applying it physically in a chaotic situation. And the more that you train, the less chaotic it becomes, or actually it's still chaotic, but the more comfortable you are in operating in chaos. And so, you know, when we started looking at this course, it derived from the fact that, you know, a lot of people teach gunfighting tactics that they're teaching the short form version of it. And you can't abridge a tactic that has a lot of flushing out to do in ideas and dynamics and situations. And so what I don't like is like the clickbait version of tactics. And so when I look at a combatives course, for example, if you're in a self-defense situation and, you know, somebody has a firearm and you don't know it yet, and then you're in close proximity to them, let's say you're at a bar, and the way things have escalated in our society with physical violence is insane. Because people nowadays, maybe because they watch the Instagram highlight reels, they immediately think that they're justified in going to a gun, or they just brawl that way, right? They're a criminal, a violent actor, that's just how they roll. But let's say you're in that bar and you're in that configuration in which they go to draw a pistol and you're in close proximity, meaning you're in arm's reach distance from them. You have to flesh out what your actions are going to be. And so when we discuss this in depth in teaching undercover officers, low vis, military and law enforcement courses, it's like if this isn't fleshed out and you don't have a tactic to address that scenario, and then what's probably going to happen is you're going to subscribe to chaos and you're going to be fighting for a gun on the floor of a bar, and whoever comes out on top is going to live and whoever comes out on the bottom is going to die. And so it's like you have to take close proximity physical confrontation and fights serious. In fact, more serious than you do. It's like med, right? We teach people like, hey, if you're training to shoot a gun, why are you not training for the trauma that you would see in a gunshot wound or an accident or trauma period? Because statistically you're more likely to be involved in that. Well, violent crimes, I mean, I think in Prescott it's like 1 in 4. It's like a 25% chance over a span of a decade that you're going to see a violent act or be confronted with physical violence. You have to know how to address that, because if you don't and it escalates, you're looking at the worst case scenario on how and you manage it.
Yeah, how you're going to navigate through that whole thing, and having something is better than trying to figure it out.
Yeah, figuring out on the fly
in that moment. Yeah, and that's what's cool, and that's what we're trying to give people. We're trying to give people the exposure and the experience with human contact. You know, a lot of people have never just like held on to somebody and they try to get away from them, or they've never tried to hold somebody as they try to get away from the other person. So these are the things we want to give them. We want to give them that experience, that exposure. A lot of it, again, blends with wrestling. So if you've already wrestled with your kids, with your spouse, with your friends, if you've done any sort of horseplay, that stuff is great. We just need to hone it and translate it into a defensive structure, and that's kind of what we have going on. And then we blend all of that with clinch work and short range striking, and then we throw in some weapon scenarios and just help you develop a scenario-based training or we develop a scenario-based training for you to experience, so that, again, like you said, you're not rolling around on the ground trying to figure this out. You've already dealt with something similar, and now it's just about problem solving it live. And that's a crazy scenario. Imagine a dude goes to pull a gun, we're at a bar, I stuff it, and I'm trying to dominate him. Now I'm also responsible for everybody else in the bar, because if he pulls it and he just starts pulling triggers and I can't control him, 10, 15 people might get shot, 2, 3, whatever the numbers, but now all these people are gonna get shot because the dude now is gonna more desperately try to deploy that gun, because now I'm pressing him, right? So I need to be violent and aggressive, and there needs to be complete control. And that's kind of what we want to do and give people.
Yeah, I love that training methodology, because I mean it makes a lot of sense, but just not a lot of people do that as trainers, instructors, or even as practitioners of combatives. I remember the first time that I realized that what we might be learning in a tactic period was potentially the wrong thing, and it began with it was pre-modern Army combatives. So if you're a military guy, a special operations guy, combat arms guy, I think in special operations right now, it's a requirement that you have at least level 1 as a minimum. It's part of our warrior leader course or whatever, that you're basically qualified to do combatives, and then you have to elevate. And I think me, Raul, and George have all been to level 1 and level 2 modern Army combatives. Before that, we had a couple hybrids. We had like lines defense, and it was a Marine Corps combatives program. And then part of that program, we were learning jiu-jitsu on the side. So, you know, as a special forces candidate, we were training jiu-jitsu every morning. And, you know, I have a background in jiu-jitsu and jiu-jitsu growing up as a kid. And so when I transitioned into that, I was like very comfortable in operating on my back in any sense of jits or jiu-jitsu. The problem is when you do a hybrid and you don't properly teach the tactic with the role or the duty or responsibility, then you neglect a lot of things. For example, like special operators that go inside and do CQB, close quarters battle. Well, we were having scenarios where we were running into guys and having to combat these guys. And if it was terrorists, which any scenario that special operations is involved in a direct action sense, it would be terrorists, it'd be bad guys. Well, I don't think even in the lulls of warfare that I've been in where our rules of engagement changed, if a bad guy, I've shot 3 people in combat that have grabbed my gun in combat, that have fought me for my gun. 2 of them didn't have guns, 1 of them did have a gun. The rules of engagement support, like if you're combating me over my rifle and you're a targeted a bad guy, you're getting shot. I mean, that's how it's going down. And there's a lot of circumstances, even in law enforcement and other military experiences, where it could be justified as a use of force as well. Because if you're a law enforcement officer and you draw a gun and the dude grabs your gun and you're combating over that gun, he's trying to get that gun, he or she's trying to get that gun as to present himself as an imminent threat. So you're defending your life at that point. And so what guys were doing was we were running into guys grabbing our guns, and then dudes were immediately wrapping their legs around them and going to the ground in the guard.
Cool.
And what we were seeing was like, it's like, okay, what are you gonna do? And then the instructors were like, oh, you're gonna do an arm bar. We're like, no, the fuck, you're not gonna do an arm bar. You're gonna shoot this dude in his head. And maybe you'll arm bar him to spread his hands away from his body so you can get enough leverage on him so you can move to a gun in order to finish the threat. But it instilled this bad training scar, this habit of, if I'm very good in the guard. So if I grab a guy and then he starts combating me and there's a leverage issue, I'm immediately going to the guard because I know I'm confident in the guard. Well, doing that as a combatant in the middle of a fight for your life scenario, even in a bar, is not smart.
Right.
It's you want to stay on your feet to an extent, depending on who you're combating, and you don't want to lose your leverage. What are some instances of some of the things that you're going to be teaching that make it different than other tactics or techniques that are being taught by combatives instructors?
So, though we will spend some time on the ground, it's not going to be a focus. The focus that we're going to translate ground stuff is going to be getting up. So creating shields and separations, simple stuff from full mount, which is, it's a hard position to get into, right? Like, how did you get there? So we're going to try, if we are going to do those things, and like we mentioned in the description of the program, it's going to progress the way the class decides it's going to progress, right? How everyone's learning, and that's kind of that way we can keep everyone together. If we get to certain things where, okay, let's navigate. Worst case scenario, some dude's completely strapped over your abdomen. Like, how did you get there? We'll dissect that first, and then we'll find the solutions for it, just so that you can understand that that's not just something that happens. Things have to lead up to that, right? So a lot of that's going to be getting out of those positions and getting back to your feet, because on your feet you can do a lot of things. You can fight. There's more power. You can run if you have to. You can run after your kids that are running the other way, or run to your car and get a force multiplier, or go get a friend, go get help. Your feet are very important. We use them every day. We walk everywhere. We do everything with them. Let's keep them in the fight instead of going to our back, which is a very unnatural position for most people, right? So let's not do that, but definitely let's have solutions to get back to our feet. Because if we do end up on the ground, and it happens, I mean, you can slip, you can fall. There's variables that are unknown sometimes in these situations. I remember pulling a dude out of what are they, like the attic,
The rafters.
the little attic space hole. Like, we went into the house, we hit the house. He's hiding in the attic. You hear him moving around. We find a little thing in this tiny little closet. So you open the little shutter door to the closet. There's a washer dryer here, a little bit of space here, stuff stacked there, and then there's the little cutout where he went in. So he ends up putting his feet through. We pull him out. He starts fighting, and now we have 3 dudes. Nobody's communicating. Nobody knows what to do next. They just know to grab, right? So somebody needs to either communicate or start taking control of the situation and moving dudes around. And that's kind of, again, those situations where he went to the ground. We were able to dominate him from the top and get him cuffed and solve that problem. But if we would have taken him to the ground, and now there's 3 other dudes trying to fight to get him cuffed, and you're on the ground and he's on the ground, and nobody knows what they're doing. There's this element that just doesn't make sense to be on the ground fighting. So I think what happens is, dudes, it's so comfortable to be in the guard. It's a really comfortable position. Like, I like it too. It's easy to stay there. It's easy to mitigate the dude and not let him pass, and then you can do arm bars and triangles and all this cool stuff. But if the dude's committed and you're wearing a belt or you're wearing some sort of kit, you're offering that to him, because your hips are above his waist, and he can just, stuff your hands, pin them to your chest, and start working your OC spray or your cuffs and bash you in the face with them, or your baton, or maybe your gun, depending on where stuff is, right? It translates differently when there's equipment involved. And I think that's what's left out of a lot of things. And they're like, well, we're just going to train this and it's going to work. But you add stuff that changes the game, and not training with it kind of puts you in a tough spot. So our stuff is going to be ground development to your feet. but we will have a ground aspect because you need it and it's important, but the focus is going to be getting your butt off the ground.
Yeah, the hybrid consideration is, you know, when you're carrying a pistol, like that's why I have a whole set of problem sets when I look at people training tactics, and I use the glorified retracted gun because that seems to be popular on social media. And so when somebody's doing a slow-mo retracted gun where they're sweeping the target with their weak hand across the top or chest or head of the target, and then they're retracted, shooting the rounds into the gut or to the chest or the torso. I'm not saying specifically that's a problem as long as it's in a comprehensive strategy. But what I'm saying is when it comes to getting in a close proximity physical confrontation with somebody in self-defense and you are carrying a pistol, there is a lot of legal ramifications that come along and responsibility that come along with when the use of deadly force is suited. So like somebody can come up to you and say, give me all your money, and they say it verbally and they don't have a gun. Well, you can't just draw your pistol and shoot that person in the face. I mean, some places, most places actually, because that isn't even probably won't even hold up to a court of law for the stand your ground law, because no physical violence has been inflicted upon you, you're going to prison forever. I mean, that's a murder charge, right? Hey, give me your money. I felt I was in threat for my life. Well, he didn't have a gun, he didn't present a gun, and so there's issues there. Now the person comes up to you and they kick you in your chest and you fall on your back. Well, in some states, if it's stand your ground, you could literally use deadly force in order to defend yourself. And it doesn't have to be a confined space. That guy in Florida at the convenience store, it was a parking lot, it was open space. So some states have that law where you don't have to retreat. But then some states don't have that at all. So you fall to your back, now you get back on your feet, and the question is, what are your next actions? Well, in the state of California, if you have the ability to retreat or walk away, then, and you don't take that out, and then you're in a physical confrontation or you use deadly force, you again, manslaughter minimum being involved in that. So there's a whole bunch of things that have to happen decision-making wise up to the point in which you decide to use deadly force at the point in which you use it. So my whole thing is in decision-making. When we look at this course, right? If I told you right now, I was going to have a guy communicating to you. You had your everyday carry pistol, and this guy potentially has a weapon. And on the command of you measure his behavior and react based off of, or react accordingly, your actions are going to determine your fate. And you stand next to this guy, and this guy's like, hey, everything's cool. And then he goes to go for his waistband. Well, if you haven't identified that that's a gun or that's a threat inside your head, then you probably aren't going to draw. But what are you going to do? Well, you might collapse your hands on that person's wrist or hands or fight for the gun. But what if it's not a gun? Well, what if it is? These kind of like things that you need to be aware of. Because one of the big mistakes I saw this weekend teaching undercover officers, it's not a mistake, it was like a lessons learned, was so the person went for their gun. And then there was a commitment to stop their hands from going to the gun. Mm-hmm. But then there was a bailout of that commitment to go for their gun. So now they're over a second behind the person drawing the gun. So they're completely reactive. And then in confiding in confining their hands in that close proximity space, they didn't feel confident that they would have control. So they bailed off control and went for their gun. So that situation in itself could end very poorly for the person that, you know, decides to commit in one instance and then bails. Or it could be completely advantageous. Right. I mean, if the person gets spun and then you don't have visual on their gun, then maybe you do push away. Then you do go for your gun, and then maybe you blade your body or you jump off the X and you're moving laterally and then engaging or something of that nature. But those kind of things, what I've noticed in law enforcement and training law enforcement, are never fleshed out until it happens. Yeah. And so it becomes this like catastrophic event that changes policy, changes training methodology for years or decades to come, when it should have been addressed from the get-go. And so those things is what we're going to be fleshing out at this March 9th course.
Yeah, you see that a lot with a lot of policies is they'll wait for somebody to either get killed or seriously injured before they decide, oh, you know what, let's amp it up a little bit and add some of this or some of that, and that's unfortunate. You know, when guys sign up for the military or for jobs, yeah, there's that inherent risk, but there's no need to feel like, yeah, he died because he volunteered for that. Like, nobody signs up to die, right? Everybody wants to come back and tell their stories and do their thing. So there should be things that limit how much damage the protective roles in society have to take.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and the crazy thing about being you know, I was in Iraq and we were changing our tactic from doing DA raids or kicking in the doors to doing call outs because it was Al Qaeda, and they would just barricade themselves, you know, a couple rooms deep and shoot you in the face, or they would rig the house, or they would have S-vests on. And so when you kicked in the door, you're going to get somebody who's just going to clock their vest off and take mass casualties. It's like, at some point we had to stop, and we did. We went, well, what are we doing? Why are we losing Americans over a bunch of shitheads that are going to die anyway? They're just willing to die anyway. So the interesting thing with that is that's deliberate, strategic, and tactical level operations. Well, when you're in the Wild West, right, when you're on your own, it's a completely different set of circumstances, because you might not have the mutual support. You might not have the, you know, forethought or you know, the idea that you might be in a bad predicament. You might just be chilling in a restaurant or at a gas station, just doing your own thing, and the next thing you're confronted with that decision and literally propelled into chaos. So you have to be prepared for that. I mean, we talked about it a little bit yesterday, but when you look at the number of people that haven't been in full contact sports or confrontations physically, the reactions that you're going to get are varied, and they pretty much are all bad decision making processes. I mean, it's not glorious to see a group full of students who have never been in a physical confrontation. It's ugly.
For sure.
But when they come out of that experience, the fact that they know they can get through a physical confrontation is mind changing. I mean, it's life changing as well.
Yeah, that's cool that we are now getting into this and getting the people in to start training them, because it allows us to touch on a few things. And here's two big ones, right? And we'll get into them. So the idea of action versus reaction, right? Action being, I start a movement and now I'm ahead of the game. That's legit if everything is equal, right? The action's gonna beat it because we're both equal and I've already started. So I'm already ahead of the game. But now you take somebody, and now let's compare it to somebody who's never experienced physical contact, they've never fought, they've never done any of these things, and they're that equal, right? Because most bad guys, they don't train. They're definitely more aggressive than the everyday folk, but they're not out there training, they're not working on their cardio, they're not willing to do these extra things that the trained folks do. So we take these two people and they're equal. Action's gonna be reaction, absolutely, because everything is equal. But now you get somebody, you train them to be fast, they have quick hands, they have quick reaction to things. Now, even if the action starts and they're behind it, their ability to catch up is better because the other person isn't trained. So the action versus reaction concept, idea, sure, it's legit if everything is equal. But now you make somebody better, you train them better, they train themselves even further, and they're gonna be ahead though they started behind. And this is legit. I've seen this in a program that I helped develop for Chicago PD, where the officers would have training guns and they would just learn to read each other's movements. So like shoulder shrugs, hands moving towards guns, and the one side of the line would reach for their gun, draw, and try to present faster than the other guy. And in the beginning, the action line always won. And it's cool because they're learning still, right? Towards the end of this drill, and maybe 30 minutes into it, the dudes were catching up, if not beating them, because of certain attributes. They were younger, faster, they maybe trained a little more, they understood the drill, so they were able to pick up on that and really get faster than the dude who was initiating it. So if we're equal, we're standing in front of each other and we're doing the old school draw thing just because it's an isolated moment in training, right? I'm not saying that that's a realistic moment, but it's it's a good way to isolate training and build dudes in progressive steps. So it was cool to see that at least 50% of the guys that were reacting were now faster to the gun than the dude who initiated the movement. And that's all just training. And it was 20 minutes of dudes who were willing to take on the information. And then you had the guys who were like, oh, whatever, I don't want to be here. And there's always those guys, but that's cool. the idea is to get into the heads of the dudes who want that training, who are looking for that training. So that whole action reaction thing, we're gonna breed it into people so that even if they feel like, oh man, he's already going for something, well, I've trained enough that I'm confident enough to create a response that's gonna help me problem solve this faster. Which piggybacks onto anything on the action reaction idea?
No, I think it's brilliant because I see the greatest point, which is to quantify performance and to be able to have some kind of tangible to be able to give feedback and then drive improvement. I mean, that's how you do it.
Yeah, and if that would have backfired in front of all these 13,000 officers that we had in Chicago, that drill wouldn't exist. I'd be like, no way. It ended up being reviewed because they're like, well, we don't want to be pointing guns at each other. I was like, dude, they're training guns. And I'm telling you that it's isolating this, has nothing to do with guns being pointed at you. It's like speed reaction drills to make people cognitively faster. But either way, that leads me into stuff that, man, I'm so excited because it's gonna help people with so much, and we're gonna try to build them up, which is really cool. And we'll get into the whole concept of reaction and responding. Right? So reaction is kind of this emotional state where you may be compromised. Again, you're behind the curve. It's emotional. You're like, oh my God, what's happening? Now I have to do something, right? Again, that leads into the action reaction stuff where we can breed it out a little bit, but it's gonna take the help of the individual. We need them to train as well because we can't teach them everything. We can give them the tools. They use the tools. They get better. Cool, right? Build that house. We're just gonna provide all the material. You build a house. With reaction and responding, right? So the reaction is an emotional state, kind of like compromised. You have to do something. Where if you have trained, now you have response. You have files that you can refer to and be like, oh, you know what? I've seen dudes reaching for their waistband. Though I'm not gonna try to blast him. I'm gonna collapse on him and see what develops. And now that's faster instead of like how you experienced where they were like, yes and no. So they started to move forward. They were gonna do something and it felt right initially, right? Because that was the initial movement. And then they were like, well, shit, I don't know. So they went back to something that they felt more comfortable with, right? Because they finalized the execution of trying to get their gun out. So they committed to that versus the initial one, which was a good idea. I mean, she should have closed in and done her thing there and fought her way through that. So what we want to do is teach people to come out of the reaction phase, which is, it's gonna happen, right? You're gonna get startled, it's gonna be a reaction, but we want you to respond through that. We want you to have a calculated decision before you've become too compromised, where now you're aggressing and you're putting them on their haunches, you're putting them on their heels, you're making them think through their next step because you've decided to do this. So it's like commit, decide, go. And that comes with a little bit of training and the enthusiasm from the individual to continue to make themselves better.
Yeah, I think when I think about that confrontation and you talk about the reaction, we teach that in gunfighting, right? When you drive your gun and you're confronted with an imminent threat. An imminent threat is a barrel pointing at you. You're 0.2 of a second from getting shot in the face. That's imminence. And there's different degrees of imminence, but the reality is when you're confronted with a surprise of imminence. And I remember being taught this concept, right? And it started with CQB, where it's like, hey, every time you check behind a door, it should be a deliberate and conscious approach, and it should be somewhat methodical, not in speed, but in the actual tactic and how you apply it. So it's a deliberate process. And then if you were surprised, like you pulled back a door and there's something there, they said, hey, you shouldn't be surprised. Well, one of the first dudes I killed in combat was hiding behind a door, and I was surprised. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not gonna go, oh, I wasn't surprised, I expected it. But there was a process behind it, meaning I wasn't just casually checking behind doors, not expecting contact. My gun was retracted, I was prepared, my gun was on auto, it was off safe, and I had my finger even prepped over the trigger. Because, in a training scenario, when it's not real life, you can't get away with that because of the institution. But when you're in war and there's bad guys all over the objective that want to kill you or blow you up, you better sure as shit prep your stuff, and every millisecond counts. So it was a deliberate process that allowed me to be surprised, but have a reaction that responded to the threat accordingly and proportionately. So a bad guy hiding behind a door has a gun, he's getting blazed down, and there's a millisecond, and my reaction is breaking the shot on the trigger. And so what I tell people is like when they consciously are confronted with some kind of imminence of threat, they're going to have a fight or flight response. It's going to be that oh shit moment where you know, it's a breath, it's a gasp, it's a flinch, but in that moment you're allotted that, but you have to get yourself back to reality. And some of the things that we talk about are one, consciously being engaged by breathing. You should have just came in at full speed. You just completely fucked that up. Consciously being aware and staying connected by breathing, but evolving through the gunfight because you're aware. When you start to breathe deliberately, you're conscious. And so when you're aware, you're on the forefront of your mind. You're not where most people would be when they're confronted with violence or with something scary, where they're in the fetal sucking on their thumb in the background of their mind. And a lot of people waste a lot of time until they're confronted with some kind of reality. And if they're blessed enough to be still alive, then they have to take a appropriate response. But I like that, and I like that idea that like, hey, something's bad going to happen. This dude's going for his gun. Well, if you have no tactic because you just don't fucking know and you don't train enough and you have nothing left, throttle the dude. I mean, crush that dude's lower jaw and just try to knock him unconscious as hard as you can, because anything in that instance to disrupt his technical proficiency is better than nothing, because the alternative is you do absolutely nothing, you flinch or flinch, and then you're sitting there waiting to get shot in the face by a guy who's going to draw his gun or do something violent. So it's the same conscious approach that we have in shooting. It's just now you're thinking through it physically, with some kind of motor skill, with some kind of physical movement to impede the progress of that dude who's going to do you harm.
Yeah, and, we're ready to hear a lot of, well, I would do this, and I would do that, and I would knee him in the nuts, and I would do all this other stuff. And I get it, those are all options, but we're trying to build these people, right? The program isn't designed to compete with anybody else. It's designed to make the people who come to us better. I don't care who's teaching what and where, and if it's great and amazing, awesome. Keep doing your thing, train with everybody that you can get your hands on. But what we're doing is not only with the program, adding the mindset stuff like what you were saying, man, it sounds like you were really present. You were in the moment and you did what you needed to do while still being live in that moment. You weren't like,
I wasn't checked out.
Yeah, you weren't checked out. And being present is so key. And this is where we lose people, where people are like now thinking of the what next instead of like sitting in the gym, we're training. This is what we're doing. Stay with me. Stop trying to think of the 10 ninjas that are gonna raid your house and you're a samurai now, right? Because 10 ninjas and samurais. But like, there's no need for that. Stay present, stay in the moment. And I remember, so the way I would do it, so I'm chasing this dude down an alley. He makes a turn, he makes another turn. Now he's just beeline down the alley, and I'm watching him, and I'm like just focused on breathing and running. Boom, he turns again. Now I'm like, all right, I need to make a plan in case he jumps out. Cool, made that plan, still running because I need to run to get to him, right? So when I turned that corner in that little hallway with the giant fence, I didn't know there was a wall or a fence there. I thought the dude kept going, so I turned full speed. We run into each other, boom. I need to be present. I need to understand that, well, now I'm in contact with this dude. How do I navigate this? This is the next solution. This is the next solution. And just constantly giving solutions to problems and keeping them from like coming back to that. You're always keeping them moving so that they're not proficient enough to execute anything because you're just dominating. And that's kind of what the idea is. Like, let's train, let's get aggressive, let's be dominant, and let's win these things.
Yeah, I think it's spot on, man. And when you think about the conscious approach, it's very deliberate. There's a lot of things that you got to stay switched on for. And I've talked to Tim Kennedy is a buddy of mine, and I've talked to him in depth and detail about when you're in a confrontation with somebody, don't just be a lot of guys want to be fluid because they have a couple tactics that they've been taught in their back pocket, but concentrate your efforts on a few good moves that you're really great at, as opposed to thinking that you're going to be dynamic, especially when it comes to defending your life. Like I know I'm good at knocking people out. I've done it. I've done it a lot. I mean, I'm more so than I'm proud to even talk about. But I know how to knock somebody unconscious. I've done it in combat. I've done it in the real world in fights, and so I know where the button's at. And so I'm good at finding that. Well, if that doesn't work, then I know I'm good at clinching people and choking people out.
Yeah.
So I might just focus on the few things I'm good at, as opposed to looking at it like it's a competition sport. I'm looking to end the threat, and I think there's a big difference between when you look at sports and you look at the industries that are specializing in MMA versus what we're doing, which is a tactical combatives program essentially. And we're still utilizing these guys who are real smart. I mean, Jim Miller, who's a UFC lightweight division champ. He currently holds a record for the most wins in the UFC lightweight division. His younger brother is actually Dan Miller in the UFC as well. He'll be there on March 9th on our grand opening course. Also, he just mentioned Kenny Florin. I mean, he was an Ultimate Fighter champion. He's fought in middleweight, welterweight, lightweight, and featherweight, like all the weights he's fought across the board. But super talented and accomplished fighter that we're running this period of instruction through, as well as Darren, who's an accomplished UFC trainer and pride fighter. I mean, this isn't like a program that we're just spitting out of the air based on our experiences, which I think would be a good product. But this is us taking that and then validating it against the dudes who do it for a living. It's kind of like taking a tactical course of action and then applying the gun handling skills and shit, and then going to those subject matter experts to kind of refine the product. That's what we've done. And then, finally on that is when we're looking at this stuff, look, I can't wait until the mats are in the back of the gym, because we got 2,000 square feet of space that's going to be a fight club. And the reality is, the difference between us and everybody else is we're not just fighting, we're fighting for real life. So, we're going to be wearing shoes. We're going to be doing stand up and fighting in the clothing that we wear. We're going to have EDC carry considerations, knife fighting carry considerations, but it's a lab. It's a combatives lab where we could literally film and then prove every tactic. Okay, you got a tactic. The tactic is X. Okay, let's see if it works in this configuration. And this reminds me of like some Jeet Kune Do shit, some Bruce Lee hybrid stuff where it's like, hey, Bruce Lee was one of the first martial artists in America who came here with the idea that the traditional methodologies and arts that we were doing in Wing Chun and standard Kung Fu, and even Judo, Hapkido, etc., were great formats and advocates for the art form, right, for the practice. But what they weren't really good at is actually self-defense. And so he took some of the best tactics from each realm and then made his own. And I'm not saying we're reinventing the wheel here, but what I will say is we're debunking the bullshit. Because there's a lot of people out there in the tactical space, and especially the combatives and knife space, who are throwing out some bullshit. And you want to come here and then validate your tactic or technique, we're willing to work with anybody, because I want to make it so it's like a family, where we're piggybacking off of other experiences. On that, my long rant, you were talking to we actually just attended a course down in the valley with a guy. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, John from Active Self-Protection, really cool dude. First time meeting him, he was just super welcoming. Their mat space was nice. Their school was legit. They had a good setup. They had good students. And so here, before we get into it, I just want to let everybody know that's listening is this. Like Mike said, we're not reinventing anything. We're not doing anything new. There's no new stuff, right? Even in the tax space, in the martial arts world, nothing is really new. It just gets redone. And somebody tries to rebrand and throw a new name on it or a random new spin. That's not what we're doing. That's not what we want to do. Our program is just rooted in what men have been doing for a long time. The gladiators did wrestling. Everybody fought some sort of like contact sport where you learn to dominate, grab, take control, and just win the fight. So a lot of our stuff is rooted in that. It's rooted in wrestling. It's rooted in the clinch. It's rooted in knees and elbows. It's rooted in just close proximity stuff that we need to get into people's heads so that they can train it that have never trained anything, So yeah, back to John, and yeah, we went there and he was doing some stuff from Craig Douglas's stuff, just shiv works. Again, it's proximity stuff, knife gun stuff, negotiating with blades and things like that, and it was a lot of fun. And the styles are different. I'm sure. I think they teach Kempo there, and I'm more of a now just stand-up grappling and dominating more from the feet, just because I don't want to be on the ground, and they don't either. I'm pretty sure Kempo's stand-up stuff. So yeah, it was cool. We were in there. We were talking about wrist ties and bicep ties and drags, and just communicating the effectiveness of certain things when things are presented, when the knife is presented, or when somebody's going for a knife and reading those movements. So it was cool to see other schools doing things that are similar, which is beneficial for us, because when we invite them to come to us, they've already seen it, their students have seen it, and they can just jump right in and we can start working them harder. And that's kind of what we're going to do with our stuff after we really get rolling, is we're going to take the stuff that we're learning, we're going to drill it into you, so you're going to learn them in isolation, then we're going to hone them in drills, and then we're going to apply them to scenarios. And then that's where we're really going to see the evolution of the individual, not really the material. The material is a standalone, right? It's a standalone item, right? There's only so many things you can do from a wrist tie, so many things you can do from all these positions, and that's why they need to be implemented into the scenarios so that people can execute them and create those files for themselves, and that's where the real growth is going to come in. But yeah, I was in the Valley, hung out with John, like I said, active self-protection, and I think we should reach out to him and get him up here and get his feedback. I know he's got a good following that understands self-defense, and they're very pro self-defense, so it'll be a good local resource, because he's in Phoenix, so it'll be nice.
Yeah, that's cool, man. I like building that community, and a lot of the things that I think about when I'm thinking about tactics and kind of in this confined or close proximity space, is there's a lot of things that you could read and measure that can get you in a more advantageous position, or even mitigate the encounter period based on reading behavioral dynamics. And I've taught my guys behavioral dynamics and special operations. I've been to a lot of cover courses like OCTC, peacetime detention, all these cover courses that talk about tactical interrogation, but also reading behavioral dynamics. And there's a whole bunch of indicators of things that are going wrong. And what I always tell people as a pro tip is, look, if there's a behavior that you're reading and you're seeing it with physical movement, and it could be the combination of facial expressions with appendages, right, with arms and legs and hands, that is an indicator that something is happening, right? It's not an indicator that, which means simply that you should change your posture, right? The way that you, when you're confronted with somebody who's potentially going to use violence. And there's a situation where me and Kurt were in, where we were traveling, I think we were traveling actually here from Arizona, or from Colorado. And there was a guy in a gas station, pulled up real close in a vehicle behind Kurt's vehicle, and was kind of using his vehicle in the gas position to like bully his way into the position. He was honking, he was yelling and screaming with his windows up. And I'm like, well, that's kind of ballsy, right? You see a Tacoma and it looks kitted out, and it just looks like you don't want to fuck with the people inside. And then I'm in my 4Runner about to drive out to the main road, and I kind of see this situation develop. And Kurt had one of his baby birds inside of the vehicle, so one of his kids. And I'm like, okay, so he has to protect the baby bird. I'm going to go confront this door and see what's going on. Yeah. So I immediately close the distance on the vehicle, but I'm out of close proximity or arm's reach range of that person. And so when I'm reading his behavior, I look behind Kurt's truck, and this dude's an inch away from hitting an inch. Yeah. And so literally, he could have been, just based on a simple mistake or maybe a deliberate decision, of impacting the vehicle using his thousands of pound weapon to bully himself in that space. That's like, you're in a bar and then you get a baseball bat and you start clearing the crowd with your baseball bat. Right. He's using his vehicle. And so I immediately recognize this as a potential threat. So I immediately do what I've been trained to do, which is close the distance on the threat. Because number one, behaviorally, I'm assessing this person's reaction. I'm assessing, hey, are they going to, because they have two options, right? When confronted with posturing, the person has two options. They could back down and then the situation can reduce itself, which can then turn into a flanking maneuver or a bad situation. But it's a deliberate tactic. Or they could bow up, and in the bowing up, they would increase their level of violence. Well, he's already using his vehicle as potential level, so I immediately knew if I was out of close distance and this person had the balls to use his vehicle as a weapon, then he could be the person that would use a weapon from his vehicle as a weapon. So I immediately went to the windshield and to the driver's side window, which was rolled up, and I told him firmly, I said, listen to me, if you don't back your fucking car up, I'm gonna drag you out of this car and I'm gonna fuck you up. And so I'm giving him clear and concise instructions. And this isn't me being a badass, this is me literally confronting somebody who's willing to use his vehicle as a potential weapon and giving him the option.
Yeah, he's threatening.
He's threatening, so now he's got the option. Well, this is where I'm assessing this behavioral dynamic. I'm assessing what is this guy gonna do, because he has options. He could throw his vehicle in drive and smash into Kurt's vehicle, back up violently and do something egregious. That's true, he could do that. Or he could realize the situation that he's in and he could reduce his posture, back up, and then walk away from the confrontation. I was in arm's reach because I knew if he had a gun, I couldn't see his hands. So he would draw his gun and I wouldn't be able to do anything. So I'm like a patrol officer who's standing over this guy and he's kind of boxed in and he's got options. And so I'm looking at his hands because hands telegraph a lot of responsibility. They tell you, hey, is this guy gonna go into his pockets to reach for something? Is he gonna grab the steering wheel and then put the vehicle in reverse? What is he gonna do? So it gives me some advantage in reading his actions. So the dude, I'm looking at his hands, he realizes I'm not fucking around and he decides to back the vehicle up. Well, a common mistake that's made is, and I've seen it, the video that I use to communicate about this is the officer who's basically in a chase with the guy. He finally gets the guy in a cul-de-sac, in a dirt road cul-de-sac, goes up to him, sprays him with mace, and then is like really pissed off that he made him do this, sprays the guy and then walks away like, F this guy. And the guy turns around while he's been sprayed in the face with mace and shoots, I think 10 times and hits the officer in the back and kills him. And so it's like when you're confronted with this, it doesn't end until you're in a safe zone. Yeah. And that's to be determined. Me, it would probably be in my vehicle, rolling down the road with clear visual of what's behind me. And then I would be like in the clear space. So he starts backing up and I immediately back up and I'm just posturing, prepared to react if I have to. But walking through that whole event, there's a whole bunch of behavioral indicators that are taking place and posturing that happens prior to an engagement. And the whole point of this course is, remember, in the society that we live in today, things can go from 0, meaning non-violence, non-confrontational, to 100 miles an hour in milliseconds, meaning confrontational and then using a means of violence to confront you. So going for a gun, going for a knife, going for a stick, going for a weapon, or throwing blows. And people are, I don't know, they've gotten better at being sneaky fucks, right? It's the guy who's like, no, everything's cool, and then he cold cocks you in the face. Yeah. Because you were in a confrontation, he's reducing your posture because he knows that you're all spun up. And he knows if he gets you to calm down for an instance, that leaves you vulnerable, and then he could rock your world. So a lot of this course is in that. There's a whole bunch of things prior to even being in that engagement that I think we could teach you in behavioral dynamics that will benefit you in the fight.
Yeah, like here's some easy tips for for law enforcement, and I'll just throw them out so you guys can use them. But so I come up to this guy, and I know he's a runner, and I know he always runs when he's got something on him, right? So I have him on the car, hands on the hood. I'm like, all right, man, put your hands behind your back. He knows that I'm going to cuff him, right? Because I'm indicating that I'm going to do something that's going to restrain him. So instead of just going for my cuffs, thinking he's going to comply, I tap my cuff case, and it rattles them the way it would sound if I was deploying them. Yeah. Right? So I tap him, hands out, and he pushes off the car and starts to run. I knew he was going to do that because I've used that tactic before.
You're just conditioning him.
Yeah. I'm like, boom. He's used to hearing that click coming out, the cuffs coming out, and then boom, they boogie. And so I knew if he was going to run, my hands were ready to grab him, and I was able to grab him and put him on the car.
Because you have the speed advantage, right? Because your hands weren't actually tied up with the cuffs,
Yeah.
you just tapped
I
them.
wasn't holding them, and then now
Yeah.
I'm running holding them and thinking about putting them back because now I have to use two hands to grab him. I just tapped him. I knew he was gonna go, and he boogied. And it's one of those things where you mentioned it, it's like we have to be able to trust our vibe. People put out weird vibes when they're doing stuff, especially when they're under stress and they're trying to contain it. Like lip quivering when somebody's got an adrenaline dump. If you don't know these things, or like your eyelashes will twitch. Like people get these indicators, and we need to be able to start picking up on those things, even if there isn't anything present. Like you said, if the dude's trying to calm me down, but he's twitching, like he's thinking something. So we need to be able to transfer that information into people, use that in the initial portion of it, and then get into the training, the physical aspects where they can control themselves. Other stuff that's just really basic things is just talking to people. When you talk to people, they have to either respond or they're going to be quiet. If they're quiet, that's another indicator. Like, what the hell are you thinking? You know?
You're fleshing out all the behavior just by communicating to them.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we want to start to give these people, is that ability to use these little tricks. Law enforcement, military, anybody. But stuff that's really simple, that asking people a question, like when I would walk up to some of these guys, like I'll walk up to T, be like, "You got any drugs on you, bro? Come on." He'd be like, "No." So he'd do these movements where he'll touch where the drugs are. And it's hilarious. Like his hand will reach for his little fifth pocket, or it'll go to his back pocket, or he'll touch his groin. I'm like, "Come on, man, stop lying." And he'll be like, "No, I ain't got nothing." I'm like, "Yeah, you do. I don't even care. It's weed, bro. Keep it. You know, whatever you need." And not that's the kind of cop where I was like, I'd rather build rapport with these guys than smash them and put more cases on them for a bag of weed. Like I knew I could come back and talk to these dudes and be like, "Hey, who smoked Joe?" And they would tell you, because they'd be like, "Hey, I'm not no snitch, but this is what happened. He was my guy." And it's just kind of how it worked. My first week in the department, on the street as a patrol officer, I was getting dudes turning guns in, just because I knew how to talk to them. I knew how to work the angles, and that's what's missing. A lot of understanding how people react, how they move, their body language, and knowing who's gonna do what. And you knew these things, right? So as a copper, if you want to know something, ask it first. I mean, what does it hurt to ask? Like, "Hey, you got a gun on you? You got any weapons on you?" And then they're like, "Oh yeah, it's right here, but it's not right here." You know what I mean? Like they're touching it because they want to reinforce that it's there, but they don't want you to know, but they want to know. And we see it with dudes that are trying to conceal things, right? They'll touch it, make sure that it's there, and like, all right. You see it with dudes that carry CCW. You're sitting at a restaurant, you see a dude come in, and he's all super hyper vigilant, and he's doing his like little checks on everything and looking for exits and all this crazy stuff, and then he'll sit down and he'll kind of like adjust his appendix. Oh, that dude's carrying. You just read him, and I don't do that. I think I've come to the point where I've trained enough, and I want to think that I'm okay in any situation. So back to a door, if I'm sitting somewhere, it doesn't matter where I am, I'm gonna navigate the shit out of this, because what I want for me and for everyone who trains with us is we want to create safe people, not safe environments, right? So gun stickers, it's a mock safe environment. Fuck that, man. Let's make safe people that are confident in themselves and their abilities, where they can go anywhere and be okay, right? This translates a lot to the range. Like dudes run these hyper safety ranges, right? And because they don't want to transfer over the responsibility to the individual. So a lot of the range stuff that I do is I hone in and I talk about safety, and we make that a dire thing. It's like safety is paramount, but it's in your hands. I need you to start taking responsibility for this shit, because I'm not gonna be there to be like, "Hey, you flagged him. Hey, you flagged him." Where I'm super hyper, now I know that this guy's maybe a risk, and I'm not negotiating the people over here and giving them the right attention. So we talk about safety, and I'll kick a dude off the range. If he's unsafe to everyone else, he probably just needs a little more gun handling training. So go home, pick up your gun, go to the bathroom, understand where your muzzle is, things like that. Things that help you become safer as an individual. So we want to make thinkers, we want to make safe people, not safe environment, not safe ranges. Like people that are safe will inherently make the area safe, right? Because they can provide coverage for it. So that's what we want to do. We want to do that for our training in firearms, for our training in hand-to-hand stuff, just mindset stuff, is just make people better for themselves instead of relying on other things to be their safety net, right? The little stickers, oh, everything must be safe because the little stickers on the wall. That's not how it works. Like bad dudes don't think like that. Laws are designed for people that are going to follow the law. Bad dudes don't follow laws. So
yeah, that's weird that you have to say that out loud. Sometimes it's just weird. I have to tweet it, and it's weird. How how do people learn more about you and kind of your methodologies and some of the stuff you're putting out? You got your social media stuff?
Yeah, so you guys can find me on Instagram, Raul.Martinez.Jr. Soon enough, we'll be launching the Gray Method, which will be a podcast thing where we get to really hone in on these little things on top of all the other stuff we got going on here. So the Gray Method will be running up, it's a project in a sense where we just demystify stuff, get in the best trainers and try to cross-reference their stuff with our stuff and, you know, give you the grays, because I mean, though we want to live in a world of black and white, the gray is kind of where we operate in a safe space for us. So
Yeah, I've seen both sides of, like, you know, patrol officers, and you know, I tell good officers, I'm like, you're an asset handler, man. You're a source handler. If you're not working assets and working people to build relationships and then flush out the real bad guys, then you're not doing your job. But you have some officers that are just like black and white, man. They don't live in the gray, and they think it's a moral conundrum, for lack of a better term. It's like it's a dilemma. It's like, no, it's not a dilemma, dude. It's like there is nothing black and white and straight edge in the world, because we're talking about human beings and behavior.
Yeah.
And so there is a gray, and it's like how you navigate the gray, how you develop relationships, how you flush out violent criminals who are killing people, is more important than let's slow down a little bit with the dudes with dime bags and putting them in, making them lifetime felons forever. I was listening to a podcast on Joe Rogan, and Andrew Yang was on there, was talking about the first thing he'd do when he got elected would be release all the lower drug crimes for petty drugs like marijuana that are in our system, just sucking up taxpayer dollars, you know, $75K a year to even house these dudes over dime bags. It's like, come on, man.
Yeah.
There's more important shit going on.
And you see that a lot with dudes who haven't experienced much. They throw the badge on and now they're a superhero and they're trying to, you know, hey, this is me and you are this. Like, dude, when you put on a badge, it doesn't change anything. You're just providing a service for the public. So you should be on the public side. Like when law enforcement has lost the sense of responsibility to care for the public instead of just focusing on going after bad guys, like, dude, there's an imbalance there. Like, the people are first, bad guys are a priority, but the people are first, man. Like, we have to take care of the community, and that's kind of how I policed. And a lot of people liked it, a lot of people didn't like it. And I get it, because agencies are run kind of like a business, right? They have to produce, but it's unspoken. Like, they can't say or show you paper that says, hey, we need to meet these quotas, because quotas are bad, right? It's immoral or
Unethical, yeah.
Unethical. I guess morality doesn't play too much into it, but yeah, it's unethical for the society that you're in, right? So, and that's how I was. I wasn't trying to hammer dudes for anything. I would rather have them as a resource. And even here, if I would pull somebody over, I would talk to them, see what's going on, and I would make a decision. But it was most of the time was like, well, if I give you this ticket and you have a light that's busted, now you have to pay the light and you have to pay the ticket, and you probably don't have the money for either. So it would be a lot of like, hey, get that fixed. Hopefully I'll see you again and it's done and we'll never have to talk again. And it was that kind of interaction. And I got a lot of great feedback from the public, especially when I would go and they would show me that they fixed whatever the problem was. I could go into court and I'd be like, hey, let's throw this case out because he got it fixed. And that's what we wanted to do, right? We were there to fix the problem, which was, let's say, a taillight that was out. And you find a lot of drugs that way too, which is funny enough, right? Somebody's got a malfunctioning piece of equipment, and you can work your way through the car if you know what you're doing and find things. But so if the person fixed the problem, there's no longer a need for the institution to hammer them or create files on them, right? Put people in databases or whatever. So it was that. That's the style that I ran, and I think it was because my priority were the people. I always wanted to make sure that the community was there, and you see it in movies, you see it, or you hear it in radio shows, podcasts, and in real life I've seen it where you treat people well, they'll take care of you. It's like, let's say I'm in Austin and I crash my car and I can't do anything. These dudes are gonna call and be like, hey man, this guy's fucked up, you just crashed. Instead of just coming up, filming you, stealing your shit, and leaving you there to die, you know, until somebody else finds you. And that's the whole thing, is like, you build these relationships. Yeah, you're not friends, you're not gonna marry their sister or go hang out at their barbecues, but you've built some sort of rapport where the people respect you and you respect them.
Yeah, especially the community you live in, that you police. It's like, dude, don't be a dick, man. There's plenty of dicks to go around, and by time, you know, when you need the help or assistance or whatever, it's like, you don't want to be in that predicament.
You want whoever's gonna pass by, to be like, oh, well, maybe I should lend a hand. And here it's different, right? Arizona's a little more pro law enforcement. Chicago was a little bit less, but even there, I was able to build the rapport, and I never felt unsafe in the communities that I was in. I mean, I knew I had to navigate shit scenarios and people were bad and I could potentially get hurt or killed, and that's cool. We knew that. But I also knew that somewhere in a window where there was a kid that I waved at one point, he'd run and grab his phone and be like, oh, this guy just got shot, go help him. So I was okay with that, just because I had planted those little seeds of respect within the communities and within the people, and that's important. And I think it's important in the industry now, in the business of training. It's important in anything you do. Like, now everybody's really self-involved, and it's like, let's get back to community stuff. Like, let's grow with each other and educate people, man. Like, the use of force issue that we see constantly with cops, right? Oh, excessive force this, excessive force that. A lot of that has to do with their training or their inability to train, or their lack of desire to train themselves, right? So we talked about it a little bit. A dude swinging his baton at some guy's leg 10, 15 times looks excessive, but unfortunately that's all he ever learned, because that's all he ever cared to learn. But now if he learned to fight a little bit, and he learned to do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, one swift punch, like you were saying, you could lay dudes out, and this guy knows he could lay dudes out because now he's practiced it and he sees his power, he's been training, he's confident, he lays a dude out with one punch. Yeah, it looks violent, but it's not 10 strikes to the leg where everybody's recording it for 25 seconds. It's one quick second of a decision to stop something that was bad. And so there's a big difference between ineffective force and excessive force, and that's what a lot of the supervisors need to understand when they're putting their dudes on the road. Like, dude, take care of your guys. You're a supervisor for a reason. It's not just to hold your rank, it's to now make your guys safer and better. So I would really like to see that training evolve for law enforcement, because ineffective force is now what's dividing the communities. Dude's not well trained, he's beating up this guy, everybody's on the other guy's side, but the other guy started it, but I could have, as a cop, ended it quicker if I did a belly to back suplex and he's out and I cuff him, right? Just, it looks violent, but it's done. It's not me, oh, seeing the guy, shit, he's not going down. Taser, he's not going down. Baton, he's not going down. Like, it's just, violence needs violence, and it's one of those things where you have to be aggressive enough to end it as quickly as possible. And I'm not saying end lives, right? I'm saying end the situation, the conflict, as quickly as possible, with the force needed to end it, without it looking like you're just out to beat people up. And that's where cops get a bad rep, and it's more of the ineffectiveness of their training, which it could be their fault or not. It could be the department that says, no, we're not gonna do this, but still, ultimately, if the copper wants to get training, there's a ton of training he can go to. There's training everywhere. Even to conditioning, right? Dudes will freak out, they can't breathe anymore, they just chase you for half a block, they can't breathe, he's panicking because he can't catch his breath, he sees the bad guy turn around, he doesn't know what the bad guy's gonna do, he'll draw his pistol just to solve the problem as quickly as possible and shoot this dude just because he's mentally and physically unfit for the job. So there should be some level of standard of physicality for law enforcement to show the public that they care enough to take care of themselves.
I like that methodology, man. Well, that sums up the podcast, man. I appreciate you coming on, and a lot of good stuff in the near future.
Absolutely. If
you're tuning in, this is the first time that we've actually recorded on YouTube. You saw George's big ass walk in here and interrupt the whole podcast. But he's you could just see his nose on the video. There. Oh, you can't see. Oh, maybe it's frozen. Oh, it's frozen.
No, it's because of the battery.
Yeah. You can do that, I guess.
Well, thanks for my first podcast.
No, man, it was good, man. It was a good podcast. Thanks for coming
nice
on.
to get it done and understand what it kind of feels like to talk and paint a picture with words versus being on TV or video.
It was a good podcast, man. We'll have you back soon, and then be kicking off this new podcast you'll have to put out soon, which is called
The Gray Method.
The Gray Method.
Yeah, we're gonna try and, like I said, just like you said and I said, and in conversations with everyone here, is let's debunk some stuff and give people what they need.
I like that.
Simplified.
I need a Gray Method hat. I think it's gonna be a sick hat.
It's gonna be awesome.
All right, guys. Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Fieldcraft Survival Podcast. Hey, we just launched fieldcraftmobility.com. It's a completely different entity, no guns, no knives, because we don't want to lose our privileges on Facebook kind of thing. But fieldcraftmobility.com is going to have a lot of the overland stuff on there. We will be at the Rough Rider 100 this weekend, which if you're just listening to this, it's May 16th. I'm sorry, not May 16th, but President's Day weekend, February 16th, 17th, and 18th. Also, in the near future, we just dropped the pre-order for the MVP, the modular visor panel. That's a first aid kit panel that goes on your headrest, your visor. You can put the basic hemorrhage response kit on the back of your panel, your go bag panel. It's coming out in the next 2 weeks, but the pre-order is available now on fieldcraftsurvival.com. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Until next time, stay alert, stay alive. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Hope that